Every woman in Cedar Falls knew the sting of being overlooked. But for Sarah Mitchell at 25, it was a constant, bitter poison. She'd watched every decent man in town choose someone else. Someone younger, someone prettier, someone whose father didn't run a failing dry goods store and drink away the profits. The whispers followed her everywhere. Spinster, old maid. So when Jacob Stone, a rugged mountain man with eyes the color of a winter sky, offered her marriage, it felt like salvation. He was older, weathered, but he looked at her like she was the first woman he'd ever truly seen. He spoke of a life in the high country, clean and new, away from the judging eyes of the town. A place where she could breathe, a place where she could be wanted. Sarah packed her few belongings and followed him into the vast Colorado wilderness, her heart so full of hope it felt like it might burst. She was finally getting her chance at a family, at a life. What Sarah didn't know was that this wasn't Jacob's first time taking a wife from Cedar Falls. What she didn't know was that he had a collection. And what she couldn't possibly imagine was that her own two sisters, Martha and Rebecca, who had vanished years before, had warmed his bed long before she ever did. The mountain holds secrets darker than its deepest ravines, and Sarah was about to walk right into the heart of one. Sarah Mitchell had always lived in the shadow of her sisters. Martha and Rebecca were golden-haired and bright, their laughter like wind chimes. Men fell over themselves for a single glance. Sarah was the quiet one, with dark hair and gray eyes that held a depth most folks found unsettling. She was plain. She was forgotten. The Mitchell family name had once meant something. Her grandfather's general store was the biggest in 3 counties, but her father's thirst for whiskey had whittled their fortune down to nothing but dusty shelves and unpaid debts. Martha escaped first. She married a traveling merchant when Sarah was just 19. Gone. Rebecca followed 2 years later. Her departure was a mystery. One morning she announced she was going to find Martha. She walked out the door and never came back. Her parents, worn down by grief, barely spoke their names. Her mother sat rocking by the window, staring at the distant mountain passes. Her father found his comfort at the bottom of a bottle. Sarah was left to run the store, tending to customers who saw right through her. It was on a bleak October morning that Jacob Stone walked in. He was a mountain of a man, with shoulders that filled the doorway and hands that looked like they could split logs with a single squeeze. He wasn't handsome in the way town boys were. His face was a roadmap of harsh sun and harder winters. But he looked at her. He really, truly looked at her. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "I've heard tell you're a woman of uncommon sense and rare beauty." Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. No man had ever called her beautiful. She fumbled with a bolt of fabric, suddenly aware of her worn dress and calloused hands. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, sir." He took off his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with silver. "Jacob Stone. I keep a place up in the high country. Been watching this town for some time, and I've taken particular notice of you." A man had been watching her, thinking of her. After a lifetime of being invisible, the feeling was intoxicating. Over the next few weeks, Jacob became a fixture at the store. He'd arrive in the late afternoon, bringing her gifts from the high country. Wildflowers that shouldn't have grown at such altitude. A jar of honey from bees that thrived in the cold. Smooth stones from a hidden mountain stream. He painted pictures with his words, telling her of vast, silent landscapes under an endless sky. "A woman like you doesn't belong in a dusty place like this," he'd say, his eyes sweeping over the failing store. "You belong somewhere clean, somewhere you can breathe." Sarah found herself living for his visits. She'd pin her hair with extra care, wear her one good dress on the days she expected him. The thought of his mountain home became a tangible ache in her chest. The proposal came on a snowy November night. He'd stayed late to help her lock up. As she turned the key, he took her hands in his. They were warm and rough, but his touch was gentle. "Sarah Mitchell," he began, his voice serious. "I'm not a man for flowery words, but I know quality when I see it, and you're the finest woman this valley has ever produced. I'm asking you to be my wife." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the dream she had given up on. A small, practical part of her screamed warnings. A man she'd known for 2 months? A life in the total wilderness? But the lonely, desperate part of her soul shouted louder. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Jacob. I'll marry you. The wedding was 3 days later, a simple, quiet affair. Her parents seemed more relieved than anything else. Jacob had no family to invite. Sarah wore her mother's old wedding dress, taken in to fit her slighter frame. As she said her vows, Jacob's eyes never left her. His voice was a pillar of certainty when he promised to love and protect her. For the first time, she felt chosen. After Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house pulled her aside, the old woman's face was a mess of worry. Child, she whispered, you don't know this man. Mountain folk keep to themselves for a reason, and not always a good one. Sarah just squeezed her hand. He's kind to me, Mrs. Henderson. That's more than I've ever had. The journey up the mountain took all day. The wagon path dissolved into a deer trail. In the last 2 miles, they walked through snow up to their knees. Just as Sarah thought she would collapse, they crested a ridge, and there it was. Jacob's homestead. The cabin was huge, built from massive pine logs with smoke curling from a stone chimney. Lamplight glowed from the windows like a warm promise. It's beautiful, Sarah breathed. The isolation didn't feel frightening. It felt like a sanctuary. Jacob swept her up into his arms and carried her over the threshold. The inside was warm and comfortable. A fire crackled in the hearth. The air smelled of pine, leather, and something else. Something faintly floral, like her mother's roses. Welcome home, Mrs. Stone, Jacob said. Sarah turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. Woven rugs, well-stocked shelves. It was more of a home than she'd ever dared to dream of. But then her eyes started to notice the details. Little things, women's touches, delicate curtains on the windows, pressed flowers in frames on the mantel, and beside one of the chairs, a sewing basket. The embroidery inside was only half finished. Jacob, she said, her voice careful, whose things are these? His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a shudder falling. Just things I've picked up over the years, he said smoothly. Thought they'd make the place more welcoming for a wife. The explanation made sense. It was even thoughtful, but a prickle of unease traced its way down her spine. She told herself she was being foolish. This was her wedding night. She wouldn't spoil it with suspicion. He showed her the rest of the cabin. A big kitchen, a root cellar packed for winter, and a bedroom with a massive bed covered in quilts made with feminine patterns. Everything spoke of a man who had prepared for her arrival. Later, as they sat by the fire, Sarah tried to relax. Jacob was attentive, gentle. This was her new life, a good life. But her eyes kept drifting back to that sewing basket. When Jacob stepped outside to check on the animals, she couldn't resist. She lifted the lid. Inside was delicate work, handkerchiefs with intricate lace, pillowcases embroidered with tiny flowers, and at the bottom, a baby's gown, half finished, made of the softest white cotton. Sarah's hands trembled as she held it. The work was recent. The thread was still bright. Someone had sat in this very chair, maybe just weeks ago, stitching hopes for a child that would never be born. Find something interesting. Sarah spun around. Jacob stood in the doorway, his face unreadable in the dim light. She fumbled to put the tiny gown back, her cheeks burning. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Our things, Jacob corrected, moving closer. Everything here is yours now, Sarah. Everything. But he didn't answer the question hanging in the air. He just took the sewing basket from her hands and set it aside. His movements were deliberate, final. Come to bed, wife, he said softly. As she followed him to the bedroom, she couldn't shake the feeling she'd walked into a story already in progress, that these beautiful things weren't for her at all. They were the remnants of someone else's life. And as she lay in the darkness, Jacob's gentle hands couldn't chase away the cold certainty that she was sleeping in another woman's bed. The first week was a blur of domestic bliss. Jacob was the perfect husband, attentive, kind. He brought her coffee in the mornings and told her stories of the mountain by the fire at night. But the feeling that she was an intruder in her own home wouldn't go away. The feeling was like a splinter under her skin, a constant, nagging irritation. It was while cleaning their bedroom that she found the first real clue. Jacob was out checking on his cattle, leaving her alone for the first time. She decided to organize the dresser drawers to make a space for her own meager belongings. The top drawer was warped and stuck fast. She had to pry it open. When it finally gave way with a sharp crack, she saw it. Nestled among Jacob's things was a delicate blue hair ribbon, the exact shade her sister Rebecca had always loved. Sarah's hands shook as she picked it up. It was made of silk, matching a dress their mother had made for Rebecca's 16th birthday, and caught in its folds was a single unmistakable strand of golden hair. Rebecca's hair. Sarah sank onto the bed, the room spinning. How? How could her sister's ribbon be in Jacob's most private drawer? Her mind scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe he found it. Maybe it wasn't Rebecca's at all. But she knew. Deep in her gut, she knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a sign, a warning. Her sister had been in this room. When Jacob returned that evening, Sarah waited until after supper. She laid the ribbon on the table between them. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I found this today," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It belonged to my sister, Rebecca." Jacob's face showed no surprise, just a mild, casual interest. He picked up the ribbon, turning it over in his large hands. "Pretty thing. Where did you find it?" "In your dresser drawer, Jacob." He said nothing for a long moment. He just wound the ribbon around his finger. Sarah watched his hands, strong and capable, hands that could easily overpower a woman. When he finally looked at her, his blue eyes were as cold as glacier ice. "Your sister was a beautiful woman," he said. "We knew each other." "Knew each other? How?" Sarah's voice cracked. "She disappeared 3 years ago, Jacob. She came up here looking for Martha and never came home. What happened to her?" Jacob stood and walked to the fireplace, the ribbon still in his hand. "Rebecca was headstrong," he said, his back to her. "She thought she could survive up here on her own." Then he did something that made Sarah's blood run cold. He tossed the ribbon into the fire. It curled and blackened, vanishing in a flash of blue flame. "The mountains don't care about independence," he said simply. "Are you saying she's dead?" "I'm saying the high country claims what it wants." Sarah felt sick. The casual dismissal of her sister's fate. The deliberate destruction of the only clue she had. This wasn't a tragic accident. It was something else. Something much, much darker. But she was alone with him, miles from anyone. She forced herself to nod, to accept his story, even as every nerve in her body screamed that he was lying. That night she lay awake, watching him sleep. The man who had rescued her from a lonely life. The man who had promised to protect her. He had known her sister, and he had just burned the last trace of her. The monstrous thought took root in her mind. He hadn't just known them. He had killed them. The next morning, while Jacob was outside, Sarah began to search. She moved with a frantic, quiet desperation. She had to find proof. She had to know. Behind sacks of flour in the kitchen, her fingers brushed against a loose floorboard. She pried it up. Beneath it was a small, hidden space, and inside was a leather-bound book. Martha's diary. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with her older sister's familiar, elegant handwriting. The first entries were full of hope. She wrote of Jacob's kindness, of her love for him, of their new life on the mountain. But then the tone began to change. March 15th. Jacob was strange today when I mentioned visiting town. He says the weather is too dangerous, but I can see the pass is clear from the window. Sometimes I feel like a bird in a golden cage. March 22nd. I found women's clothing in the root cellar that isn't mine. When I asked him, he grew angry. He said I was imagining things, but I know what I saw. A blue dress, just like Rebecca always favored. April 3rd. Jacob watches me constantly now. When I suggested we visit family for Easter, he forbade it. His eyes when he's angry. There is something wrong behind them. April 10th. I tried to leave today while he was hunting. I only made it halfway to the pass before he caught me. He was gentle bringing me back, but his grip left bruises. He says he loves me too much to let me go. I'm beginning to think his love is a kind of prison. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Martha supposedly ran off with a traveling merchant. April 18th. Rebecca arrived today. I was so happy to see her, but also terrified. I tried to warn her about Jacob, but she thinks I'm being dramatic. He was so charming at dinner, made her laugh. She's staying in the spare room. I pray I am wrong about my fears, but I have hidden this diary. If something happens to me, I want someone to know the truth. Jacob Stone is not the man he pretends to be. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps. Martha had known. She had tried to warn Rebecca, but it had been too late. Both of her sisters had walked straight into this monster's trap, drawn by the same loneliness that had snared Sarah. She heard Jacob's boots on the porch. Quickly, she shoved the diary back into its hiding place and covered it with the sacks of flour. By the time he walked into the kitchen, she was at the stove, her hands shaking only slightly as she ladled porridge. "You're quiet this morning," Jacob said, sitting at the table. "Just thinking about my sisters," she managed to say. "I miss them." "Of course you do," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Family is precious." The words that would have comforted her a week ago now sounded like a threat. She smiled at him, playing the part of the devoted wife, while her mind reeled. She was living with a murderer. The man sharing her bed had killed her sisters, and if she wasn't very, very careful, she would be next. The mountain no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a tomb. But unlike her sisters, Sarah had an advantage. She knew, and as she watched him eat the breakfast she'd prepared, she began to plan. Sarah spent the next few days in a state of high alert, playing the part of the happy wife while secretly mapping out Jacob's property and his routines. Every time he left the cabin to chop wood or mend a fence, she explored a little further. Behind the cabin, built into the hillside, was a root cellar. The heavy wooden door was secured with a simple iron latch. She'd been down there with him once, had seen the shelves packed with preserves. But Martha's diary mentioned women's clothing. When Jacob was busy in the barn, Sarah slipped down into the cool, earthy darkness. The cellar was just as she remembered. Shelves of jars, smoked meats hanging from the rafters. But in the far corner, hidden behind a stack of empty crates, she found them. Dresses, not one or two, a dozen of them, hanging from wooden pegs like ghosts. She recognized Martha's green wool dress, Rebecca's blue silk. But there were others. A yellow calico, a rich burgundy velvet, a simple homespun brown that might have belonged to a farmer's daughter. Each dress was a story, a life cut short. Her hands shook as she touched the fabrics. Some were torn, some had dark rust-colored stains that could only be one thing: dried blood. Jacob didn't just kill women, he kept trophies. A sound from outside, Jacob calling to his horses, sent her scrambling back up the steps. She secured the latch just as he came around the side of the barn. She had to act normal. She couldn't let him see the terror in her eyes. That night by the fire, Jacob was more talkative than usual. He spoke of the purity of the mountains, away from the prying eyes of town. "A man can live by his own code up here," he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Follow his own nature." "Doesn't it get lonely?" Sarah asked, her voice a carefully constructed whisper of innocence. His gaze fixed on her. It was intense, possessive. "I've never been alone for long. The mountains have a way of bringing me what I need. Beautiful things. They tend to find their way to me." Ice flowed through her veins. He wasn't talking about wildflowers or smooth river stones. He was talking about her, about her sisters. He collected them. 2 days later, she met the neighbor. Jacob was out hunting. Sarah was hanging laundry when an old man leading a mule emerged from the trees. His face was weathered leather, his eyes sharp and curious. "Well, I'll be," he said, tipping a battered hat. "Didn't know old Jacob had himself another wife." Another. The word hit her like a punch to the gut. "I'm Sarah Stone," she said, keeping her voice even. "We were married last month." "Pete Garrison," the man said. "Run a trap line through this valley. Known Jacob for nigh on 8 years. His eyes darted toward the cabin, then back to her. He stepped closer. "You're the third Mrs. Stone I've met," he whispered. Sarah's mouth went dry. "The third?" "Yep. Pretty blonde girl named Martha. Then another looked just like her. Rebecca, I think. Fine women, both of them." Shame what happened. What? What did happen? Sarah whispered, her heart pounding. The old trapper's face grew guarded. Jacob tell you they ran off with other men? Sarah nodded. Pete spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. That's his story, but I've been trapping these mountains for 30 years, miss. I know every pass, every trail. Neither of them gals ever came down off this mountain. Before she could ask more, they heard it. Jacob's voice calling her name from the edge of the woods. Pete's face went pale. Don't tell him we talked, he said, his voice urgent and low. Jacob don't like his wife speaking to other folks. The last time I tried to warn Martha, Jacob's voice was closer now, angry. Pete backed away, fear etched on his face. You be careful, Mrs. Stone. Real careful. He melted back into the trees just as Jacob emerged, holding up a pair of rabbits he'd shot. Thought I heard voices, he said, his tone casual, but his eyes swept the clearing like a hawk's. Just talking to myself, Sarah said with a shaky smile. The silence gets to me sometimes. Jacob studied her for a long, unnerving moment. Finally, he seemed to accept it. Fresh meat for dinner, he said. Go on inside and start the vegetables. Sarah fled to the kitchen, but through the window she watched him. He walked to the spot where she'd been talking to Pete. He knelt, examining the ground like a tracker. He saw the mule's hoof prints. His whole body went rigid. He followed the tracks to the tree line, his movements cold and deliberate. That night, Jacob was different. His gentleness was gone, replaced by a chilling watchfulness. He asked her questions about her day, probing for any inconsistencies in her story. As they got ready for bed, he opened the dresser drawer, the one where she'd found Rebecca's ribbon. His hands moved through his belongings, checking, searching. Then his fingers closed around the handle of a long hunting knife. I'll be doing some tracking tomorrow, he said, running his thumb along the blade. Wolves in the area. Can't have them threatening the livestock. Sarah saw the dried, dark stains on the steel. They didn't look like animal blood. She thought of Pete's terrified face, his frantic warning. Maybe I could come with you, she ventured, testing him, his hands stilled on the knife. The high country is dangerous for a woman. Too many places to get hurt, to fall and never be found. You'll stay here, where you're safe. His voice left no room for argument. As he slid the knife back into the drawer, a horrifying certainty washed over her. She was looking at the weapon that had killed her sisters. The blade that had ended their lives now lay just feet from her bed, in the hands of the man who would lie beside her and whisper words of love. Pete had tried to warn Martha. Now Jacob was going tracking. Sarah knew he wasn't hunting wolves. He was hunting the old man who had tried to help her. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had just condemned Pete Garrison to death. Jacob left before the sun was up. Sarah watched him disappear into the trees, his rifle on his shoulder and that terrible knife at his belt. He was following Pete's tracks from the day before. As soon as he was gone, she went to work. She retrieved Martha's diary from its hiding place. She had to know everything. Every detail could be a clue to her own survival. Tucked inside the diary was a folded yellowed letter, addressed to her parents but never sent. It was in Martha's handwriting. Dearest Mom and Papa, I fear you will never receive this. I have made a terrible mistake. Jacob Stone is not the man he pretends to be. There is a darkness in him. I have found evidence of other women who lived here before me. He becomes violent when I ask about them. He will not let me leave this mountain. He tracks me like a hunted animal. He says he loves me too much to let me go. But this is not love. It is a sickness. Rebecca has written that she is coming to visit. I must warn her. Tell her to stay away from this cursed place. If something happens to me, please know that I loved you. Your loving daughter, Martha P.S. Jacob Stone, is a murderer. The graves behind the cabin are not for animals. Graves. Sarah ran outside. She'd seen the small fenced-off plot behind the cabin. Jacob had told her it was for beloved pets. Now she saw the truth. 13 small wooden crosses, arranged in neat rows. 13 graves. One was fresher than the others. The dirt was still dark and newly turned. She knelt beside it, whispering a prayer. Was this Martha? Rebecca? A sound from the forest snapped her head up. Voices. She scrambled back to the cabin and peered through the window. Jacob was emerging from the trees, and he wasn't alone. He was dragging Pete Garrison. The old trapper was bloodied, his hands tied behind his back, a gag stuffed in his mouth. Sarah watched in horror as Jacob forced the old man to his knees beside the wood-chopping block. Then he went into the barn. He came out with a coil of rope and the hunting knife. From behind the curtain, Sarah saw it all. The methodical preparation, the cold, practiced efficiency of a man who had done this many, many times before. She had to hear what they were saying. She crept to the bedroom window, which offered a closer view. Jacob ripped the gag from Pete's mouth. "You couldn't leave it alone, could you, old man?" Jacob's voice was calm, conversational. "Had to go filling my wife's head with stories." "She deserves to know what kind of monster she married," Pete gasped, blood trickling from his lip. "How many have you killed, Stone?" "Enough," Jacob said. "You made the same mistake Martha did, thinking you could warn them. There is no escape from this mountain, not for them, and not for you." "The law will come for me," Pete said, his voice weak. Jacob laughed, a hollow, dead sound. "The law thinks you died in an avalanche 2 winters ago. It's amazing how easy it is to make someone disappear up here." Sarah's blood ran cold. Jacob wasn't just a killer. He was a master of deception. "Sarah seems different," Pete said, stalling for time. "Stronger. She won't break as easy as the others." "Every woman breaks," Jacob said, tying a noose in the rope. "Martha lasted 6 months. Rebecca barely made it 3 weeks. Too suspicious. If Sarah tries to leave—" He looked toward the cabin, and Sarah knew he was picturing her inside. "Then she'll join her sisters in the garden. But I don't think she will. She's lonely. She'll convince herself that staying is better than dying. They all do, eventually." Sarah watched, frozen in sick fascination, as Jacob threw the rope over a thick pine branch. He slipped the noose around Pete's neck. She turned away, pressing her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block out the sounds. When she finally forced herself to look again, Pete's body was hanging limp from the tree, and Jacob was already digging a new grave. The 14th. He was whistling. As she watched her husband bury the man who tried to save her, Sarah understood. She wasn't just trapped with a murderer. She was trapped with a predator who had perfected his hunt. He knew how to isolate his victims, how to break them. But her sisters had made a mistake. They'd let him know they were suspicious. They'd tried to run. Sarah wouldn't make that mistake. She would play his game. She would become the broken, submissive wife he wanted, and she would wait for her chance. When Jacob came back inside, blood under his fingernails, she was stirring a pot of stew, a calm smile on her face. "Smells wonderful," he said, kissing her cheek. "I saw some wolf tracks near the barn today," he mentioned casually over dinner. "Big ones. I'll need to be more vigilant about protecting what's mine." He wasn't talking about wolves. He was talking about her. She nodded, her expression full of concern. But inside, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. She wouldn't end up in his garden of the dead. If Jacob Stone wanted to add her to his collection, he was about to find out that some trophies fight back. The day after Pete's murder, Sarah knew she had to find out for sure. As soon as Jacob left to check his traps, she grabbed a small spade and went to the garden of graves. She went to the freshest one, Pete's. But it was the one next to it, the one with slightly less settled earth, that called to her. She began to dig. The ground was cold and hard. Her hands quickly blistered. But she didn't stop. She had to know. About 6 inches down, her spade hit something hard, something that wasn't a rock. It gleamed in the pale morning light. She dropped to her knees, clawing at the dirt with her bare hands. It was a silver locket, Rebecca's locket, a gift from their grandmother. Inside was a tiny photograph of the three of them, Martha, Rebecca, and Sarah, smiling. Before the world had turned dark, the chain was broken, as if it had been ripped from her sister's neck. Sarah clutched it to her chest, a single hot tear rolling down her cheek. This was it, the final, terrible proof. She carefully refilled the grave, hiding all evidence of her digging. She tucked the locket inside her dress, a cold weight against her heart. It was a memorial, and it was a promise. She wouldn't just survive, she would get justice. Her mind now worked with a cold, clear purpose. She cataloged every detail of the homestead, every tool, every path, every one of Jacob's habits. Knowledge was her only weapon. The barn was a place he'd forbidden her to enter. He said the tools were dangerous, the animals unpredictable. Now she knew why. She slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of hay and something else. Something metallic and grim. It wasn't just a barn, it was his workshop. Coils of rope, some stained dark, hung from the rafters. A workbench was lined with knives of every shape and size, all sharpened to a razor's edge. And along one wall, arranged like a museum exhibit, were the personal effects of his victims. Jewelry boxes, faded photographs of smiling women, bundles of letters that were never sent. In the center of the display was a black leather ledger. Her hands shook as she opened it. Page after page of Jacob's neat, precise handwriting. Names, dates, descriptions of his methods. Sketches showing where each body was buried. It was his murder diary, a detailed confession stretching back 15 years. November 3rd, 1859, first success, Mary Catherine Walsh, age 19. Resisted but broke after 2 weeks of proper training, disposed of deck first after escape attempt. Buried northeast section. Sarah's stomach heaved as she read on. Dozens of women, lured by his promises, only to end up as an entry in his book in A Cross in His Garden. She found her sisters' names. March 12th, 1869, Martha Rose Mitchell, age 23. Exceptionally beautiful specimen. Lasted 6 months before disposal became necessary. Sister Rebecca arrived April 18th as predicted. 2-for-1 acquisition proves efficiency of targeting family groups. April 30th, 1869, Rebecca Ann Mitchell, age 21. Suspicious nature made breaking difficult. Disposed of May 2nd after failed escape attempt. Both Mitchell sisters buried in southeast section. Consider targeting final sister if opportunity arises. The final sister. Her blood turned to ice as she read the last entry in the book. November 8th, 1870, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, age 25. Last of the Mitchell line. Desperate for marriage due to advanced age. Perfect candidate for long-term acquisition. Wedding Nov 11th. Expects 6 to 8 months of useful service before disposal becomes necessary. Disposal. He had already planned her death, sometime between May and July. To him, she wasn't a wife. She wasn't even a person. She was a specimen, an acquisition, with an expiration date. But the ledger also gave her a flicker of hope. Jacob's arrogance had made him careless. He had documented everything. This book could hang him. A shout from outside, Jacob calling to the horses, jerked her back to reality. She slammed the ledger shut, put it back exactly where she found it, and fled the barn. She was peeling apples in the kitchen when he walked in, trying to make her frantic energy look like domestic enthusiasm. He watched her for a long moment, his eyes sharp and calculating. "You seem energetic today," he said. "I suppose I'm finally starting to feel at home here," she replied, her voice a perfect imitation of contentment. "Good," he said, his hands settling on her shoulders, his grip just a little too tight. Some women never adjust. They let loneliness drive them to unfortunate decisions. He was testing her, probing for any sign that she knew. That night she lay beside him in the dark, his steady breathing a monstrous rhythm beside her. She couldn't run. He was an expert tracker. She couldn't fight him. He was too strong. But she had the ledger. She had his confession, and she had a plan. It was dangerous. It would require a performance so convincing that he would never suspect a thing. She would have to become the perfect, broken wife. She would have to convince him that he had won. And then, when he least expected it, she would destroy him. Rebecca's locket was cold against her skin, a reminder of what was at stake. The mountain had claimed 2 Mitchell sisters. It would not claim the third. Sarah's transformation began the next morning. It was subtle at first. She started asking his opinion on everything. How he liked his coffee, where to store the extra blankets. She deferred to his judgment, praising his wisdom. When he suggested she wear her hair down, she immediately unpinned it, letting it fall across her shoulders. He watched the changes with a smug satisfaction. He thought he was breaking her, taming her. He had no idea she was forging a weapon out of his own expectations. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him one evening, About some women lacking strength for mountain living. I think I understand now. He paused, intrigued. And what have you learned? She chose her words carefully, echoing his own twisted philosophy back at him. I think some women fight their nature. They struggle against things they can't change, instead of finding happiness in acceptance. Very wise, he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Many women never learn that lesson. Over the next few weeks, she became the woman in his ledger, the perfect specimen. She stopped asking about town. She showed no interest in the world beyond his property. She listened to his stories with rapt attention. She responded to his touch with feigned affection. And it worked. He started to trust her. He began leaving her alone for longer and longer periods, off on hunting trips that lasted all day. He was confident his broken little wife would be waiting for him, docile and obedient. These absences were her salvation. They gave her the time she needed. During one of his trips, she went back to the root cellar. In a trunk she hadn't searched before, she found them. Wedding dresses. Martha's dress was on top, the one their mother had worn, carefully preserved, and beside it, another. An ivory satin gown Sarah recognized from Rebecca's letters. The dream dress her sister had spent months sewing for a wedding that never happened. There were a dozen more, a collection of broken promises, each one representing a woman who had stood at an altar with Jacob, believing she had found her future. At the bottom of the trunk, she found his most treasured trophies, photographs, pictures of his victims, smiling and radiant in their wedding gowns, standing beside him. The dates went back to 1858. She stared at his face in each picture. The same gentle smile, the same kind eyes, the perfect mask of a devoted husband. No wonder they had trusted him. She had trusted him. These photos, along with the ledger, were his undoing. It was all the proof anyone would ever need. But getting it off the mountain was another story. The answer came to her in late December. Jacob mentioned his monthly supply run. He traded furs in distant towns, a trip that would take him away for nearly a week. His next trip was in early January. She had her chance. She began to prepare in secret, hiding food, warm clothing. She chose the most damning pages from his ledger, the most recognizable photographs and jewelry. She planned her route, not back to Cedar Falls. He would expect that. She would go to Denver, to the federal marshals. The night before he left, she played her final, most important role. She clung to him in bed, her performance flawless. I hate when you leave, she whispered. The silence is so empty without you. He stroked her hair, his voice full of pride. You've learned to appreciate what you have, Sarah. Some women never understand how fortunate they are to be chosen. Will you be gone long? 5 days, maybe 6. But you'll be safe here. The mountain protects what belongs to it. He didn't know the mountain was about to betray him. As he slept, she lay awake, her mind racing. In a few hours, he would be gone. He would ride away, confident that his perfect broken wife was waiting. But he would be wrong. He would come back to an empty cabin, and the end of his world. A storm was building on the horizon. It would cover her tracks. The mountain that had been his accomplice for so long was about to become hers. Jacob left before dawn. Sarah stood in the doorway and waved until his wagon was out of sight, the very picture of a heartbroken wife. The moment he was gone, she exploded into action. She gathered the evidence, the ledger pages, the photos, the jewelry, and secured it all in a leather satchel. But before she left, one last secret called to her, a locked wooden box Jacob kept under their bed, his most private possessions. She pried it open. What she found inside changed everything. It wasn't just trinkets, it was official documents. A sheriff's badge from Leadville, Colorado, a yellowed newspaper clipping with a sketch of a wanted a man named Deputy Jacob Steinman, wanted for the rape and murder of 3 women in his custody. The warrant was dated 1858. Jacob Stone wasn't just a killer, he was a fugitive lawman. He had used his badge, his position of trust, to prey on women, and then vanished into the mountains. He knew how law enforcement worked. He knew how to cover his tracks. But that wasn't the worst of it. At the bottom of the box was a letter, in Jacob's handwriting, addressed only to brother. The lawman's life served its purpose, but became too dangerous. The mountain provides better hunting grounds. Isolated women desperate enough to trust a stranger. No witnesses. I've perfected the method you suggested. Marriage provides legal access and social camouflage. The collection grows steadily. 15 acquisitions to date. Your advice about targeting family groups has proven especially effective. The Mitchell sisters provided excellent support. Sarah's vision blurred. He wasn't working alone. Somewhere out there was a brother, someone who was helping him, guiding him, sharing his methods. This wasn't one monster. It was a network. Then she found one last item, a small leather journal just like Martha's. But the handwriting was different. October 15th, 1870. Brother Jay reports successful acquisition of final Mitchell specimen. Plans to maintain this one longer. Have forwarded intelligence on potential subjects in Wyoming territory. 3 unmarried sisters in Laramie show promise. The journal was a logbook for a systematic campaign of murder, spanning multiple states, with entries signed Brother M. She realized she was holding the blueprint for a secret society of killers. But the final entry made her heart stop. December 20th, 1870. Brother Jay reports Sarah Mitchell showing signs of complete submission. Have identified replacement candidate in case early termination becomes necessary. Widow Emma Hartwell, neighboring property, shows interest in Brother Jay's welfare. Emma, the kind widow from the next homestead over. The only person who had shown her any friendship. She was Jacob's next victim. Sarah was no longer just running for her life. She was racing to save Emma's. She had to warn her. The storm Jacob had predicted was about to break. It would make her journey treacherous, but it would also hide her from view. She took one last look at the cabin that was meant to be her tomb, then stepped out into the biting wind. She carried the evidence that could bring down an empire of murder. But as she hurried through the forest toward Emma's homestead, she couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. Had Jacob's trip been a trick? A test? Was he out there right now, letting her think she was free, just toying with her before the final kill? The wind howled through the pines like the screams of the dead, and every shadow seemed to hold the shape of a man. The journey to Emma's cabin was a nightmare. The storm hit with a sudden, brutal force. Snow fell so thick she could barely see her hand in front of her face. The wind was a physical thing, pushing her back, stealing her breath. She was halfway there when she heard it, a sound that wasn't the storm, the crack of a rifle. And then, carried on the wind, a voice, Jacob's voice. "Sarah, I know you're out there." He was back. He had come back early. He knew she was gone, and now he was hunting her. She plunged off the trail into the deep woods, praying the blizzard would hide her. But his voice echoed through the trees, seeming to come from all directions at once. "Come back to the cabin, Sarah. A storm is no place for a woman alone." The false concern in his voice was more terrifying than any threat. He knew she'd found his box. He knew she had the evidence. The kind husband was gone forever. Only the monster remained. She fought through the deepening snow, the satchel of evidence bumping against her hip, a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. But he was gaining on her. She could hear the crunch of his footsteps, closer and closer. He knew this mountain. He was the predator, and she was on his hunting ground. She couldn't outrun him. Then she remembered. Martha's diary. She had written about an old abandoned mine claim, a place she'd stashed supplies for an escape she never got to make. Sarah changed direction, fighting her way toward the claim. The entrance to the mine was almost completely hidden by snow, but she found it, a dark, narrow slash in the rock. 50 feet inside, in the cold, absolute darkness, her hands found a canvas bag. Inside was dried food, a wool blanket, and a double-barreled shotgun. Next to the bag, carved into the stone wall, were Martha's last words. "Jacob Stone is a murderer. Kill him before he kills you." Her hands shook as she checked the shotgun. It was loaded. She had never pointed a gun at another person in her life. But then she thought of Martha, of Rebecca, of Pete hanging from that tree. The sound of footsteps outside the mine steeled her resolve. She blew out her lantern and melted deeper into the darkness. Jacob's silhouette filled the entrance, black against the swirling white of the storm. "I know you're in there, Sarah," he said, his voice calm. "Come out now, and I promise your death will be quick. Keep hiding, and I'll make it last for days." He thought she was still the scared, helpless woman he married. He thought he had already won. Sarah raised the shotgun. The tunnel was narrow. He was a big target. She couldn't miss. But for a split second, she hesitated. The woman from Cedar Falls, the forgotten daughter, hesitated to take a human life. That hesitation almost killed her. Jacob heard the tiny scrape of her boot on the rock. He dove to the side just as she fired. The blast was deafening in the confined space. Rock chips sprayed from the wall, but he was untouched. Before she could reload, he was on his feet, charging into the darkness. "You little bitch," he snarled, the mask of civilization gone completely. "I'll make you suffer for this." She fumbled with the second shell, her fingers numb with cold and fear. He was almost on her, his hunting knife gleaming. She got the second barrel loaded, spun, and fired without aiming. The blast hit him square in the chest. It lifted him off his feet and slammed him against the mine wall. He slid to the ground, a rattling, wet sound coming from his lungs. But he wasn't dead. "You think you've won?" he gasped, blood frothing at his lips. "There are others. The network. They'll find you." Sarah backed away, the empty shotgun still aimed at his chest. "It's over, Jacob. I have your records. The law will hunt down every one of your brothers." He managed a final, gurgling laugh. "Stupid girl. We have contingencies, new identities. Then they'll spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders," she said, the steel in her own voice surprising her. She left him there, dying alone in the dark tomb he'd inadvertently chosen for himself. She stepped back out into the raging blizzard. Jacob was dead, but his last words echoed in her mind. The network. They'll find you. She had won the battle, but the war had just begun, and she was wounded, exhausted, entrapped on a mountain with a storm and a pack of killers on her trail. The blizzard was a white wall, erasing the world. Sarah fought for every step, the shotgun now a walking stick, the satchel of evidence a leaden weight. She had to get to Emma's. But then she heard new voices on the wind, not Jacob's, men, shouting to each other. "Trail leads this way. Snow's covering it fast." "Doesn't matter. She can't have gotten far." Jacob's orders were clear. "Find her, bring back the evidence. What we do with her after, that's our choice." Jacob's brothers. They were already here. She pressed herself against a tree as they passed, their lanterns cutting yellow beams through the snow. There were at least 4 of them, moving with the confidence of experienced hunters. "Check the mining claim," one of them said. A moment later, the reply came back. "Already did. Found Jacob's body. No sign of the woman. She's still moving, probably heading for the Hartwell place." They knew. They knew about Emma. This wasn't just a posse. This was an organized team. They were executing a containment plan. She heard another snatch of conversation. "Network's compromised if those documents get out. 17 active operations across 6 territories. 17. 17 Jacob Stones, scattered across the West, all part of this monstrous enterprise. The scale of it was unimaginable. She couldn't lead them to Emma's door. She had to go somewhere else, somewhere they wouldn't expect. Pete's cabin. The old trapper's place was 2 miles away, a desperate gamble in this storm. But it was her only hope, a place to rest, to regroup. The journey was a blur of pain and cold. Her world shrank to the next step, and the next. The wind howled like the ghosts of the dead, and Rebecca's locket felt like a block of ice against her skin. She was on the verge of collapse when she saw it, a dark shape through the snow. Pete's cabin. She stumbled inside, barring the door behind her. It was small, Spartan, but it was a fortress against the storm. Wood was stacked by the hearth. Shelves were lined with food and ammunition. She built a fire, the warmth a painful shock to her frozen limbs. She had just slumped to the floor when she heard it. The distant baying of hounds. They had tracking dogs. Her sanctuary was about to become a trap. She searched Pete's supplies, more shotgun shells, a sharp hunting knife, and several packets of black powder for blasting stumps. An idea born of pure desperation took shape in her mind. The barking was closer now. She could see their lanterns through the window. She had minutes. Working frantically, she placed the powder packets around the cabin, by the door, beneath the windows. She ran a long fuse from the packet nearest the fireplace to the heavy oak table she'd tipped on its side for cover. If they wanted the evidence, they would have to come and get it. A voice called out from the darkness. It was smooth, cultured, and utterly chilling. Mrs. Stone, my name is Marcus Webb. I represent certain business interests of your late husband. We would like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding some property that belongs to us. Property. He was talking about the ledger, about the lives of those women. The only arrangement I'm interested in, she yelled back, is seeing all of you hang. There was a pause. Then Webb's voice, stripped of its false charm, returned. I'm afraid that's not an option. Hand over the documents, and we will grant you a quick death. Resist, and my men will provide some prolonged entertainment. They thought they had her cornered. They thought she was just another frightened woman. They had no idea who she had become. Come and take them, she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. But I promise, you'll pay a price that makes your business unprofitable. The attack came with the dawn. The dogs fell silent. Then the window shattered. A burning torch flew in, setting a pile of Pete's furs on fire. They were going to burn her out. Last chance, Mrs. Stone, Webb shouted. Sarah lit the fuse. Lit. It sizzled toward the powder charge by the door. She had maybe 2 minutes. The door splintered. 2 men charged in, moving like soldiers. She waited until they were fully inside. Then the powder charge by the door exploded. The blast tore the front wall off the cabin. One man was thrown back out into the snow, a broken doll. The other was wounded, diving behind the iron stove. She's got explosives, he screamed. Sarah's shotgun blast cut him off, but the cabin was now an inferno. Smoke filled her lungs. Flames raced across the ceiling. She grabbed the satchel and scrambled for the back wall, where Pete's axe was hanging. The other window exploded. Another man dove through, landing in a perfect roll, a pistol in his hand. Drop it, he ordered. You're thinking too small, Mrs. Stone, the man said with a cold smile. This operation involves politicians, judges. Your husband was just a cog in the machine. You can't stop us. Maybe not, Sarah said, her finger tightening on the trigger. But I can sure as hell make it expensive. They fired at the same time. The man's bullet tore through her shoulder, spinning her against the wall. But her shot found its mark. He collapsed, his chest a ruin. As he fell, he gasped out a final, chilling warning. Webb has your friend, the widow, Emma. They had Emma. Rage, hotter than the flames around her, burned away her pain. She grabbed Pete's axe. The roof was starting to collapse. She hacked at the back wall, her wounded shoulder screaming with every swing. The logs gave way. She threw herself through the opening just as the cabin came down behind her in a shower of sparks and fire. She rolled in the snow, wounded and bleeding, the evidence clutched in her hand. The remaining killers were gone. They had retreated, and they had her friend. She couldn't go to the law. Not yet. Any move she made would be a death sentence for Emma. As the sun rose over the smoldering ruins, Sarah Mitchellstone made a choice. The hunted was about to become the hunter. She would track them down. She would rescue Emma, and she would burn their entire network to the ground. She followed their tracks for 3 days. Her shoulder was a constant, throbbing agony. She was exhausted, running on nothing but grief and rage. She found them in an abandoned logging camp, deep in a remote valley. She spent 2 days watching them, learning their routines, their guard shifts. There were 6 of them left, including Webb. Emma was alive, tied to a chair inside the main building. Sarah waited for the moment the guards changed shifts, when for a few seconds all eyes were turned inward. She slipped into the camp like a ghost. She crept to the main building and peered through a crack in the logs. Your friend is proving more resourceful than we anticipated, Webb was saying to Emma. Jacob assured us she was completely broken. Sarah's stronger than any of you, Emma spat back, her face bruised but her eyes defiant. She'll see you all hang, Webb laughed. Even if she does, we have contingencies, new identities, influential friends. This network has survived for over a decade. We are untouchable. Sarah had heard enough. She placed her last packet of black powder against the building's foundation, lit the fuse, and ran. The explosion ripped the morning apart. It blew out the back wall of the building, creating the chaos she needed. She charged into the smoke and dust, Pete's axe in her hands. One guard was buried under the debris. The other was stunned. The axe silenced him forever. Webb had his pistol out, aimed at Emma. Sarah tackled him, sending them both tumbling across the floor. The gun went off, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. He threw her off and scrambled for a rifle. She was faster. Pete's hunting knife, now hers, found its home between his shoulder blades. He collapsed, a look of disbelief on his face. The other killers were swarming the building. Sarah cut Emma's ropes and shoved Pete's spare pistol into her hands. "Can you shoot?" Sarah gasped. Emma's smile was grim. "My late husband taught me well. These bastards killed him when he started asking questions about Jacob." The final battle was short and brutal. They had expected one frightened woman. They found two avenging angels. When the gun smoke cleared, 5 more men lay dead in the snow. It was over. The journey to Denver took 2 weeks. The evidence Sarah carried, Jacob's ledger, the photographs, Webb's correspondence, was undeniable. The federal marshals listened, their faces growing grimmer with every word Sarah spoke. The trials that followed were the biggest the West had ever seen. The network was exposed. Politicians, judges, and 17 killers across 6 territories were brought to justice. Sarah returned to Cedar Falls, but she was not the same woman who had left. The quiet spinster was gone. In her place was a survivor. She and Emma used the reward money to open a refuge, a safe house for women fleeing the kind of darkness they had endured. They built their own network, one of protection, not predation. On quiet nights, Sarah would hold Rebecca's locket. Her sisters had not died in vain. Their tragedy had exposed a monstrous evil and saved countless lives. The mountain where Jacob built his garden of graves is quiet now. The victims were given proper burials, their names finally known, their stories finally told. The wind that blows through the high country pines no longer whispers of secrets and fear. It whispers of survival. It whispers of 2 sisters who went to a mountain and never came back, and of the 3rd sister who did. If this story of strength and survival touched your heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss the stories we have coming up.